Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to do a video review of the Sigma 85mm f1.4. This is the EX DG HSM lens. Now this lens was not just recently released, it was released back in 2011. But I wanted to do a review of it for a couple of reasons. Number one, I've been intrigued with this lens for some time because by all reports, it has some great optics at a reasonable price. It comes in at right under $1,000. But when you compare either the Nikon or the Canon equivalents, they are about $1,700 for the Nikon and around $2,000 for the Canon. And so this lens represents some great savings compared to those lenses while offering up similar image quality. I've seen some beautiful images taken with the lens, and so I was intrigued with the lens for itself. Of course, also in the last 2 years, Sigma has been releasing a number of new lenses in its art series, and one of the hot rumors that goes around in the photography community is that at some point Sigma will be releasing an 85mm art series lens. Because of that, and having never used this lens, I wanted to do a review of it to kind of determine for myself kind of the baseline, should there ever be an art series release to compare it to. But also I wanted to be able to evaluate this lens on its own merits, but by the standard of 2015. There have been some fantastic prime lenses released in the last couple of years, not the least of which are some of Sigma's own art series lenses. So how is this lens standing the test of time? So let's jump in and take a look. Let me add before we do that I've got a kind of a unique look going here today. I decided for something different. I would film this with an old Helios 44-2. It's a 58mm f2 lens back from the Soviet era. Mine says made in USSR on it. And it has that unique kind of swirly bokeh pattern you can see behind me. So just for something different. Anyway, back to the lens. Now, this lens, let's take a quick look at the specs compared to the Canon 85mm f1.2. Obviously, the Canon does have a bit of an aperture advantage. It is unique in offering up that 1.2 aperture at an 85mm focal length. This lens is just a little bit longer than what the Canon is. It is right around 3.4 inches long. The Canon is 3.3 inches. However, the Canon is more dense in its build. It has obviously some larger glass with the 1.2 maximum aperture, but also more metal in its construction, and so it weighs considerably more. This lens weighs 725 grams. The Canon weighs actually 1,025 grams, making it a very dense and heavy lens for its fairly compact size. This lens, it looks quite beautiful when it's mounted on a camera body because of that squat prime shape that's so nice, and then of course when you look at it from the front you see just a huge amount of glass, and of course it kind of geeks out photographers like myself to see all of that glass, and it looks great mounted on a camera. Now I find that it's a little less attractive, comes a little more average looking when you add the pedal-shaped lens hood on it. I'm always happy with the Sigma cases. They are very nice, they're padded, they're useful. I wish that other lens manufacturers would do something similar with their lenses. So kudos once again to Sigma for that. But one unique thing that's included in the box is actually a lens hood extension if you happen to be mounting the lens on a crop sensor body. I've never seen anything like this before, and as I noted in my written text review, I'm kind of intrigued to know if anybody is actually using this, if it really is necessary. Sigma obviously thought that it was, but to me it seems like a bit of a pain. But as you can see, it adds on about 1.5 inches of additional length to the lens hood, and that is so when mounting on a crop sensor body with its crop factor, I just threw it here for these purposes on a Canon 70D. It's a Canon crop sensor body. So Canon has a 1.6 times crop factor. Nikon and Sony have a 1.5 times crop factor. So mounted on a crop sensor body, the effective focal length becomes something closer to 135 millimeters. Sigma obviously felt that additional focal length required a deeper lens hood, and so I don't know if people are actually using this or finding it necessary, but it's kind of one of the interesting quirks of the design for this particular lens. On that note, let me just jump out and say I really had no issues with With flare, I shot multiple times with putting the sun into the frame, and I really didn't have flare-related issues. I actually thought that that was one of the strong points for this particular lens. And so you can determine for yourself whether or not you deem that extension necessary. But I guess it's nice that it's there in case you do need it. So this lens, as you can see, it's relatively short. It's not a difficult lens to pack along. It becomes much longer when you add the lens hood, and particularly if you're adding that extension onto it. But beyond that, this lens I found kind of interesting because it doesn't really fit into either the older category of Sigma lenses that were kind of marked by what sometimes we refer to as a crinkle finish, kind of a very strong matted finish on there that was very texturized. This lens is much smoother in its design. Frankly, I find it better looking than what that older design was. But at the same time, it's not quite what Sigma's new global vision look looks like, which is a little more sleek and modernistic. Beside that aside, this is on its own merit. It's a nice looking lens. It has a gold EX Sigma badge on the side. It has a little gold ring towards the front. You can hear that it's mostly that engineered plastics like many other lenses. It's got a metal mount. The front filter thread is also plastic, and so anyway, it's a fairly common. One thing that it does lack in the build is any kind of moisture resistance or weather sealing, and that's fairly common for Sigma Prime lenses. I don't think that I've actually encountered one that had moisture resistance or weather sealing. It has only one switch on it, and that is the on and off switch for the Autofocus, the HSM motor. It does, however, have full-time manual override, and so you probably won't be using that switch all that often, because at any point, if you do want a manual override, just grab the ring and turn it. One thing I did note that's somewhat unusual for a lot of autofocus lenses is that this actually has a reasonable amount of room between like 4 feet and infinity to where you can actually do some pinpoint autofocus. Sometimes lenses leave so little room between that point that it's very hard to actually manual focus them. So that's another plus for this particular lens. As far as the autofocus itself goes, the lens, it focuses fairly quickly, certainly faster than what the Canon 85L does, which is kind of notorious for its slow focus, although on the plus side it does autofocus accurately. So this lens is faster. The only time where I ever noticed it feeling kind of a bit sluggish is if I had it completely defocused towards its minimum focus distance and then needed to jump out into a longer focal point, and then it seems kind of gradual, and it actually feels like it's moving a lot of glass, and of course that's exactly what it's doing. As far as other quirks, I did have some kind of weird behavior when I was actually calibrating the lens. If you want more details than that, look at my written review. The linkage is below. But those issues did not repeat themselves in actual field use. Overall, the lens performed quite well. Not what I would call top tier in its autofocus, but effective enough that, although this is a demanding focal length, depth of field at 85 millimeters and f1.4 is very shallow. And so it puts some work into the autofocus system, but I found that overall my autofocus consistency was quite good. Not the absolute best as some of my best lenses in my kit, but better than a lot of other prime lenses that I've used. And so I was not dissatisfied with that. It doesn't particularly like, if you go into a live view focus, particularly on my 6D, it does a lot of kind of pulsing and hunting. It's a little bit better on this Canon 70D body, which has a far more robust system for live view, that dual pixel autofocus there. And so, but on a kind of its target bodies, full frame bodies, it didn't particularly like live view and tended to pulse and kind of hunt back and forth more often on that. Probably most of you will not be using it very often in that fashion, and with traditional viewfinder AF, it focused fairly quickly and quite accurately for me. The image quality is kind of the nitty-gritty for a lens like this, and this lens certainly does not disappoint in that department. It has really beautiful color rendition. One thing that I love about the 85 millimeter focal length is it's a great portrait length and delivers some great subject isolation. And so you can put your subject at a medium distance. For example, here's a picture that I took of my son taking a picture, and at the time I was about 15 to 18 feet from him, and yet you'll see that there's a beautiful isolation both in the foreground and then in the background. Just a nice narrow plane of focus that looks really sharp, and I particularly enjoy that look. And so this lens delivers that very nicely. The bokeh, for the most part, is nice. It delivers a lot of that creaminess that you're looking for. I found in a few unique situations, and it was kind of a definite ratio, distance to the subject and then distance from the subject to the background, that some of the edges could be a little bit harder than what I would like, which suggests that around the bokeh highlights there can be a little bit harder of an edge than what I would prefer. But overall, the bokeh from this lens is really pleasing. And here are some pictures for you to look at, kind of some bokeh-licious pictures for you to check out. Beyond that, the image quality, certainly have some chromatic aberrations. They're not out of control by any stretch of the imagination, and they're not as persistent as what I noted in the Sigma 50mm f1.4 EX. That's not the Art series. The Art series has much better controlled chromatic aberrations, but the EX Sigma had fairly strong green fringing that I found very persistent. This lens, it's less obvious, only really when you're looking at more of a pixel level, and but at the same time, it's not as well controlled as what some of the releases in the last couple of years. That's something that seems to have taken a big stride ahead, either through coatings or element optimization in the last couple of years. The primes that have been released have really done a fantastic job of controlling chromatic aberrations. And I suspect that if Sigma ever did release an Art series of this lens, that would be one area that you would see a notable difference. Another area that you might see some difference is in the overall contrast of the lens. Not to say that this lens lacks contrast. It's actually very usable, wide open, and compared to a lot of other prime lenses, it doesn't have that soft or hazy look. But at the same time, of course, I've reviewed the Otis 85mm f1.4, and the contrast, the micro contrast on that lens is stunningly good. And this lens is not in that category, and that's another area that I suspect would be kind of upgraded. Beyond that, as you look at the actual resolution from this lens, the resolution is really quite good. And if you zoom in closely to images at wide apertures, I find that there is, for shooting more like landscape images, I find that there is a difference between f1.4 and f2, but even shooting at f2, I found that there was a really nice detail. For example, this elm tree that I shot in a field, this is at f2, and I was about 35 feet from the subject when I shot the shot. And if you look at the crop here, you'll see that there's really nice detail in the branches, and that's a lot of detail to resolve there, and so I found that quite impressive. And so overall, the image quality from the lens is good. Nice color, nice resolution, nice bokeh, and very nice subject isolation. So if you're looking for a portrait lens and your budget doesn't run as high as the first-party options from either Nikon or Canon, I consider this to still be a very valid option. And another thing is that even if you're shooting kind of the more everyday type things, a lens like this, while it doesn't have the versatility, obviously, of a zoom lens, and so you may not consider that an everyday type lens, but the reality is that shooting with a prime like this will make your everyday pictures seem a whole lot more special in their look. There's something about that narrow depth of field, subject isolation, that really sets images apart, and in a way that no kit lens or zoom lens without a very wide aperture is going to accomplish. And so I enjoyed using this lens. I enjoyed the images that I was able to produce with it. And I certainly still think that after 4 years after its release, it's still a very viable option if you're looking for a great prime lens, but don't have the budget to go up to some of the top tier lenses in this. And so I think Sigma did a good job with this, and if you get a copy dialed in, and still I think autofocus is kind of your key thing, but if you get a copy where you get it nicely dialed in, I think that you're going to get some great results out of this and produce a lot of images that you and your clients or your friends and family will be very pleased to look at. I'm Dustin Abbott. If you haven't already, please subscribe,